So, Andrew, tell me, does your milkshake in fact bring all the boys to the yard?
On evidence-based reflection, yes.
Oh. I'm going to rethink publishing this video after saying that. You don't want the whole world finding out.
Yeah, they're going to find out at some stage.
Yeah. What are we doing today?
So we had a question to think about of with coaching, coach supervision, looking at it being a regular interval practice or an ad hoc practice, or versus rather.
Yeah, and I imagine it can be both. So we're looking at a spectrum with two, I won't call them extremes because I don't think they are necessarily extreme in nature.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Two things that we want to contrast.
Yeah, it's almost like maybe and then it's that in contrast to no supervision, which my hunch is that there's quite a lot of coaches that don't actually engage or know of what coach supervision is.
Yeah.
But balancing those, let's focus on those first. Assuming that people at least recognize the value of coach supervision and looking at it as a regular practice and or an ad hoc practice.
Yeah. So do you have any thoughts at the moment about those two?
So this is based on my own experience, and what I maintain for myself is I'm looking at the past 3 or 4 years, I've continuously been in a group. So I've been in one of your groups that you run continuously for the past 4 years, I think 3 or 4 years. I don't remember the number now. And I have a few supervisors that are on my speed dial, so to speak, on for ad hoc stuff, and if and when that the need arises.
So you do both?
I do both, yeah. And I think that's my experience of having a committed cadence with the group has been really important for myself. Knowing my own patterns, how I can potentially rationalize myself out of things that I know is good for me. Being committed to a group just has the dates in the diary, and it's just wonderful to have that cadence. Inevitably, it shows up at the right time, even though that cadence has been decided often months in advance. Right, your side.
So I notice what I want to advise people is more regular supervision or more frequent supervision, but that's not what I do. So I have an informal group of supervisors where we meet weekly and we can bring supervision topics and be supervised and give supervision, and we have informal discussions, often based on practice. But when I started as a coach, I regularly went to supervision, and I also regularly went to mentor coaching. And reflecting back on that, I can see enormous value in having done that. So at the moment, apart from the informal supervision group, I do ad hoc supervision. And I'm just wondering, why is it that I want to advise people to do more frequent supervision? And so I'm going to just think off the top of my head here. My experience in supervising is that many coaches have not made use of supervision after their training has ended. And they come to supervision quite some time after that. And which is different to how I did it. And I think the advantage of starting supervision very soon after training has ended is not having gotten into bad habits, and having recognized what my own stuff is that plays out in work with clients, or where I can get hooked by clients. I recognize that early on enough that I can, or that I have, I think, greater awareness of the breadth and depth of my own stuff. So that helps to recognize those things early on. And that came through frequent supervision. Because I'm trying to think of the analogy of, or an analogy, and the one that comes to mind is training for a sports event. It doesn't help to have randomly placed training.
The model that comes to mind when I hear you talk about it is the competence curve. And so competence curve is you enter in a new function and your perceived competence goes up a short while. That's usually about the excitement and energy about coming into something new. And then after some time it crests and your competence starts to go down after time. And there's a bit of, and at some point hopefully there's a turning where your competence starts to go up again. So without any prejudice towards any coaches, and I'm also speaking from my own experience coming out of my initial coach training, is that felt quite competent. And then you get out into the real world where you're coaching people that weren't your peers on coach training. And I started to second guess things. So my experience of myself as a coach wasn't very competent, and it seemed to go down. It's hard to say how other people experienced me because I can't recall the feedback from that time. But having engaged in coach supervision and mental coaching, and they are distinct functions, but those two practices in particular helped me turn that, catch that going down the curve and turn it into an upward swing. And again, building what you said, my sense is that if we think of coach supervision as in frequency of sessions, maybe there's a higher frequency here, And then as you get to the longer end of the competence going up again, the frequency changes to whatever is needed or appropriate for each coach based on maybe their set of circumstances, you know, the style of work they're doing, the amount of work they're doing, the other training that they're trying to integrate at that time in their practice.
It's enlightening to my experience over that model, or the other way around. Yeah.
The other thing that came to mind hearing you speak was, you're gonna have to help me with this author's name. It's either Mazzetti or I think it's Mazzetti. In one of his papers about supervision, he has that visual of practitioners that are beginner, intermediate, and I can't remember his third, but it's the most experienced. And the types of topics that come up, it's initially it's more in intrapersonal stuff, and then as time goes on, it's the transference stuff that shows up more in supervision sessions.
Yeah, I think he talks about it as countertransferential issues and non-countertransferential issues.
Okay, so it's the non-countertransferential issues come up more earlier on in someone's experience. So that speaks to how you reflected on your journey, that it helped you sort out your own stuff quicker or quickly. And maybe even an asterisk on there. It's like maybe the goal shouldn't be about speed, but more about the quality of how you deal with your own stuff showing up.
Yeah, I think a lot more can be said about that. Because it's not just a cognitive recognition that the stuff exists, but it's actually transformation of the stuff. And I think that's likely to be an ongoing journey. It's never once and for all obliterated or suppressed. Because I think it can manifest in different ways, and there's always new stuff to discover about self. So I was watching a video about learning how to ride a motorcycle, and the host was saying that the more he knows, or the more he learns, the more he recognizes that there's more to learn, or the less he actually knows. And I think that that's probably, you could probably translate that into any field, and I feel it's the same in learning about self and learning about others and what can happen between the two. So that journey of recognition and integrating it's a cognitive integration, but it's also a transformational integration of shifting the stuff, having other options to choose from. Which when people talk about options to choose from, it sounds also quite cognitive. But I think going cyclically experiencing, okay, well, I'm choosing a new option, and then you have a different experience after that choice, part of the integration too, because it shifts expectations and perspectives, allows you to do things with more ease and flow, more naturally. That's part of the integrative process.
Yeah.
And I think that's one argument I have for more regular supervision.
What I was going to add then was that common saying is trust the process. But hearing what you said now, it's not just blindly trusting the process, but having the confidence that the process does work, and wholeheartedly, holistically trusting the process, not just a cognitive hang on for dear life.
So how does it work in practice? The not hanging on for dear life.
Terms, I was thinking about playing with resourcing and being resourceful and feeling resourced. So like the image that keeps popping in my mind is a ship that has like a container ship that is empty, sits really high in the water and looks like it might fall over. Whereas when a container ship is fully laden, it sits like low in the water and it looks solid. So having that metaphor, feeling like I can get through the swells because I have a larger mass. I'm sitting more stably in the water because I'm resourced from integrating. Again, and then I don't feel like I'm sitting there with a bag full of tools or a bag full of competencies that I should be using or demonstrating, and rather feel that I'm able to demonstrate them as needed as part of my flavor and style. It's me doing it rather than, I'm kind of grappling here, rather than feeling like I'm doing it at somebody. I'm being with somebody instead.
Yeah, that's what came up for me as well. Is you're not doing coaching or supervision to another, because you've integrated it, so it's part of your being.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, your prompt of what does it look like in practice?
Yeah, maybe it was the analogy didn't resonate with me about holding on for the ride. Although I have experienced that in supervision. I think when people come to supervision with curiosity about themselves, instead of feeling that they have to do something, and that's also reciprocated by the supervisor's modality and their own personality and being, that things are approached with curiosity as opposed to an authoritarian approach. Supervision certainly isn't,
Mm.
then well, I still think it's a wonderful ride. But maybe there's something about one's not passive in the process because there's an active curiosity.
Mm.
And I think that, that can actually be quite difficult to recognize or experience when there's a disruptive experience in practice, because then it can feel like you're along for the ride. You experience something with a client or an organization that you've not had before, and then it's difficult to respond. And I think what gets people stuck is they respond from a default non-present or archaic space, and it's not a response to what's going on in the moment, the latter of which is what supervision is about.
Yeah.
Well, it's about both. It's about recognizing the archaic ways of reacting to things, and about creating and integrating new ways of being or responding.
Yeah. Mm. Where are we now?
We're at the end. I can't possibly think of a better way of phrasing supervision than what I just have. How about you? Do you want to try to better that?
I would never dare try. I'm looking forward to the transcription of this.
Oh God.
And I have it printed on a wonderful canvas in my study behind me one day.
We could sell t-shirts.
Mm. So I suppose I'm struck by, whenever we talk about supervision, we're clearly very on the side of supervision. And I suppose it's difficult to try and capture words that doesn't feel like that they're dripping in bias for supervision. But I think something that I was reminded of early in our discussion today was our call with Jo Searle, who's also a coach supervisor, and a trainer of coach supervisors, and her own experience of supervision early in her career was the best place for her to learn about coaching. So she completed her coach training, and her own journey of coach supervision helped her really learn what she was doing as a coach when she was already doing it.
I think it puts meat on the bones.
Yeah, it just seems like it's the most authentic representation of what coaching is about. Coaching is about supporting people live more of what they want to live, and you have to have had a couple of rounds of experience to do that.
Yeah, it's learning on the job.
Yeah, and adding coach supervision to that supercharges that process.
Okay, you've surpassed my definition.
on equal footing.
Is that it?
I think we're done.
What do we invite people to do now?
So subscribe, like, share,
Comment.
comment.
Connect with us on the LinkedIn
And-
machine and on the Clubhouse
Keep an
machine.
eye out for, so keep an eye out for events that we're running. We'd love to be able to connect and meet you.
Yeah, and people can engage with us live in our fortnightly Zoom calls.
Yeah.
Details of which you will find on the LinkedIn machine. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.